In the early Christian period, St Fionan or Finian was probably the most dominant saint in South Kerry. You can find shrines, stones, wells and churches with his name all over the Skellig region. There's even a St Finian's Bay between Portmagee and Ballinaskelligs. Look, the location of this is important, as it marks the nearest landing point to the Skelligs. Indeed, it's possible that St Fionan was the founder of the monastery in Skellig Michael. While this video is not about St Fionan himself, it is focused on a monastic site that he may well have founded. One of many, it must be said. In addition, the fact that St Fionan's name is attached to so many sites is useful, because instead of focusing on individual sites, we should see them as some sort of network, as connected to some extent. The sheer number of early Christian sites in the Skellig region highlights this. Beagnish Island, Church Island, Ilonlochon, Long Island, Braehead and Coolies in Valentia, Kilrelig, Lower, Killulig, Church Island in Lough, and many, many more. While each site has its own history, forms of observance, daily routines, sources of food, they must have been connected in some way. How this occurred, what were the actual forms of contact, was there some sort of hierarchical organization among them, are all important but so far unanswerable questions. As mentioned, in the early Christian period in South Kerry, between the 6th and 10th centuries, a considerable number of monastic sites existed. None would have been very large in terms of the number of members. Some, like the Skelligs, especially the Skelligs, would have had a considerable reputation, whether at the local, provincial or even national levels. However, most have slipped through the cracks of history. We know very little about them, if anything. Nevertheless, the religious and social impulse that led to the construction of these sites at the end of the Iveragh Peninsula must have been powerful. While excavations at various of the sites allow us to know quite a bit about how they operated on an individual basis, and even at times the diets of the monks, unveiling the reasons why people built them or adopted religious life is much harder. I want to now turn to Kilbuonia itself. Until recently, it was inaccessible. Indeed, if you look at the government's Historic Environment Viewer, it bluntly states that permission to survey the site was refused. This was when Iveragh was surveyed in the late 1980s and early 1990s. As a result, the information provided in the reviewer relies on accounts from the 1950s and the beginning of the 20th century. Fortunately, things have changed, and the site has recently been cleared of undergrowth, and some restoration work has been done on it. It's also been surveyed by archaeologists, though I don't think anything has been published about it yet. I had the very good fortune to be able to visit it on a guided tour led by Paddy Bushe as part of the recent Skellig Archaeology Festival. It was a privilege to be able to visit such a magnificent site. Indeed, magnificent is somewhat of an understatement. Kilbuonia is located in a glen on a fairly steep, south-facing slope of Knock Nascarita mountain. Westwards, it looks towards St Finian's Bay in the Skelligs. It's quite far up the mountain, around 150 metres high, which is very high for Irish patterns of settlement. While this is complete speculation, it could be that those who founded the site chose to establish a monastery at this difficult height because it was a place that was hard to live in, similar to those who went to the Skelligs or other monastic sites on islands around the Irish coasts. Perhaps the hardship of living so high was something deliberately chosen by the founders of the settlement. Kilbuonia is associated with St Buaine, or Beonig in Irish, who is said to be a sister of St Patrick. Interestingly, another sister of St Patrick, St Iveragh, is associated with Valentia Island. Little is known about St Buaine. She probably did not even exist. Indeed, there is a possibility that it was St Fionan who founded Kilbuonia. The site consists of a large number of huts, a holy well, a number of cleared terraces, and a central area accessed by a small number of steps. In this central area are a gable or tent shrine, which has recently been restored, some crosses, and an oratory or church. It is a spectacular site, one that has recently emerged from the undergrowth, or re-emerged. A word of warning. The site is on very muddy land, and the climb up to it is quite steep. Nevertheless, it is well worth it. I was there in November, when the weather was complicated and the place was really wet. However, I imagine on the clear sunny days, the views of the Skelligs, and perhaps even to Ballinaskellig's Bay, must be beautiful. The artery is largely collapsed. It measures 6.3 meters east by west and 5.5 meters north by south externally. The internal section is largely filled in with rubble from the collapsed walls or roof. Some of the walls are still existing, especially in the south and west, where they reach up to 1.3 meters high and are 1.25 meters thick. There is also the remains of a double lintel doorway, and on the south wall the remains of a window. Near the ruined artery is a lact, measuring 2.7 meters north by south by 2.5 meters east by west. It's surrounded by small stones. Incidentally, this lact and the presence on the site of white quartz stones indicate that it was probably used for pilgrimages after it had been abandoned. Near this are a cross slab with an interesting carved cross, a stone cross, and finally the gable shrine. The latter has been restored as it was in danger of collapsing. A slab of Valencia slate has been inserted to prevent this collapse. Apparently, this shrine was once referred to as a priest's grave. Gable shrines like this are actually quite rare. There are very few of them in Ireland, of which 3 are in this part of Iveragh alone. This one, a beautiful example in Lochon, and another nearby in Kilbuonia. This shrine alone makes the site worth visiting. All of this part of the site is located on the central terrace, measuring more or less 13 meters north-south by 50 meters east-west. It is revetted by a series of slabs. Below this is a larger terrace, measuring 24 meters north-south by 70 meters east-west. The entrance to the whole site is through this terrace. It contains a number of remains of circular huts and rectangular buildings. One of the huts is quite well preserved, missing just its roof. It is a corbelled dry stone construction measuring 5.8 meters in internal diameter, with its walls standing to a maximum height of 2.4 meters. Inside it is a wall niche, as well as evidence of a wooden door frame and perhaps even a window frame. Near this is an almost totally ruined hut. All that remains of it is a small bit of wall and 2 slabs marking the former door, which look like 2 small standing stones. There's almost nothing left of the 2 rectangular buildings but their foundations. There are traces and foundations of other huts scattered around the site. In addition, and importantly, only the central area has been cleared. From what I understood from the talk given at the Archaeological Festival visit, it's believed that there may be more terraces further up the mountain slope. It seems to have been argued that this land was cleared for the planting of crops, probably oats or barley. However, the altitude and the position of the monastery, as well as the very muddy and poor quality soils, would have surely have mitigated against growing crops. Perhaps they were used as animal enclosures. Finally, the site also includes a holy well. This is below the lower terrace. Beside it is a small cairn and a cross and an inscribed slab. The slab apparently dates from the 18th century. Despite the difficulty of access, the holy well was once visited and rounds practiced on a certain day. However, it seems that this has stopped. Moreover, the day I was there, it was too wet to get near the well, at least without Wellington boots. Another interesting point is that around 500 meters southwest and downslope of Kilbuonia is another monastic settlement with an oratory, cross and rectangular building. It's probable that this was connected to Kilbuonia itself. It may even have been an offshoot of the original monastery, but we will never know. This brings us back to the point I made at the beginning about the existence of a network of monastic settlements. There were large numbers of these in South Kerry, some very close to each other. Obviously, some of these were connected to each other. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's difficult to be sure about this. Hopefully, in the future, some research will be done on the pattern of monastic settlements in South Kerry, just in case any budding researchers are listening and in need of a research topic for a master's or doctorate. Returning to Kilbuonia, St Fionan and Skellig Archaeology. Were they connected? Again, we have to enter the realms of supposition here. It's not unlikely that they were. After all, the most direct landing point to the Skelligs is near St Fionan's Bay. It's likely, or probable, that the monks from the Skelligs landed there. Added to this is folklore about St Fionan coming ashore in the bay and creating a special wave, which continues to the present. Kilbuonia is not that far from the landing place, just a couple of kilometres. Moreover, both sites have similar types of terraces. Nor were they very hospitable places. They thus could have been well connected, or even have had a similar founder, St Fionan himself. On the day of the walk, it was mentioned that perhaps Kilbuonia was used to grow food for Skellig Archaeology. However, Kilbuonia is high, exposed, and on boggy ground. Could it have been used to grow crops? Possibly, but better land for crop growing would surely have been available. It would have been rather crazy for the monks on the Skelligs to depend on crops grown at Kilbuonia. Moreover, would the crops grown there have produced a sufficient surplus to send to the Skelligs? Again, the answer is rather negative. They probably were not able to do so. On the other hand, while Kilbuonia may not have been the granary of the Skelligs, the two monasteries could well have been connected to some extent. St Fionan could have been this link, or at least central to the link. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility that monks circulated between the two monasteries. Kilbuonia was thus probably connected in some sense with the Skelligs. Both are wonderful places, special places to visit, places to escape from the annoyances and difficulties of normal life. Skellig Archaeology is undoubtedly a very special, a very different and amazing place, one that really needs to be visited. However, due to the high demand, it's always busy when it's open. Unless you are very lucky and working for the OPW, it's hard to visit by yourself and encounter the solitude and tranquility that Skellig Archaeology should be characterized by. On the other hand, Kilbuonia is not a tourist destination. In a way, I hope it never is. If you're lucky enough to visit it, or some of the other special monastic sites in South Kerry, it is relatively easy to feel the tranquility and specialness of these places.